What's going on, guys? Okay, so before this episode begins with my guest, George Lockhart, the legendary strength and conditioning coach and nutritionist for some of the best fighters in the world, I do want to just give this quick preemptive apology in that during this episode, there are a few little connection issues. It's minor, but when we recorded this, we recorded it remotely with myself in North Carolina and George all the way across the world in New Zealand. So there are a few moments during the episode where the video component gets a little bit glitchy. There are a few small moments where the audio gets a little bit glitchy just for a few moments. Now, not enough to diminish from the value of this episode. It is a great conversation. But I do just want to apologize for that because I take pride in what I do. I take pride in this podcast, and I want to always put out the best possible quality content for you guys. Now, with that said, you may have seen me mention this on social media, but I've actually moved the podcast now to a professional recording studio where I'm recording with a producer. It's professional level audio, video, doing timestamps, the whole nine yards. Now, I record these episodes chronologically or release these episodes chronologically, and I have several already pre-recorded from before I moved to the new studio. So the next four or five episodes are episodes that were already recorded here out of my office. But after that fifth episode, from there moving forward, it's all episodes out of the new studio with just a leap forward in terms of production value. And I've already recorded a couple of episodes out of the new place. So it's going to be awesome. And I'm just trying to continue to make this podcast better and better. And I appreciate you guys tuning in. Now, this episode, it's a really good one. Now, whether or not you are deep into nutrition and training, you'll still get a lot out of this episode. George has been a strength coach and nutritionist for guys like Conor McGregor, Tyson Fury, some of the world champion boxers and MMA fighters. And he just gives a lot of cool insight into what goes on behind the scenes training these dudes, what their life looks like behind the scenes. He goes into some of the crazy weight cut protocols that he has to do with these guys to make weight for their fights. So this is an episode that will be interesting to all of you guys. So again, apologies for a few minor connection glitches during the episode. And as always, guys, appreciate you tuning in. So enjoy this episode with George Lockhart. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. I'm your host, John Heck. Before we get started on this conversation, I just want to give a quick shout out, as always, to the sponsors of the podcast, Troponin Supplements, keeping me decked out in some of the best gym apparel, and then, of course, just having the best supplements on the market. Before every podcast, I drop one of my ATP tablets, little dose of 300 milligrams of caffeine, a powerful nootropic, just gives me a good burst and focus, mood enhancement, keeps my memory sharp so I can go in and have a good, interesting conversation and keep things flowing for all the guests that I have on. So anyway, going into this conversation, I'm excited about this one. We're going to take things over to the world of nutrition, which of course that's right in my wheelhouse. So I'm excited about this one. The guy I have on is a world-renowned nutritionist from the world of combat sports. So he is former U.S. military. He served out in Fallujah in the early 2000s, which, if you know anything about the war in Iraq, Fallujah in the early 2000s was one of the most heated conflict zones in the world. Then outside of his career in the military, he was a competitive fighter himself. And then, of course, has gone on to be, as I said, a world-renowned nutritionist for fighters in MMA and boxing, just to name a couple of his former clients, Conor McGregor. There's been a laundry list of guys you've worked with, Tyson Fury, even some A-list celebrities that he's worked with. Anyway, George Lockhart, welcome to the show, man.
How you doing, brother? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so we were talking off the air. Right now it's 7 p.m. on a Wednesday here in North Carolina, and then it's 11 a.m. on a Thursday over in New Zealand for you. So if you don't mind, man, just tell my audience what's got you out in New Zealand, and if you could give a quick background resume on yourself.
Yeah, so just like you said, I'm a combat sports nutritionist and strength and conditioning coach. Presently, I'm working with Joseph Parker, who is the WO World Heavyweight. He's got the title for contention right now, the interim world title. Right now, we're just getting ready because we're looking at the undisputed. Usyk and Dubois are fighting July 19th. So we're just prepping, preparing, getting ready because they're just holding our belts. You know what I mean? Just holding them for us until we come and pick them up. Real background, like you said, former Marine Corps, 10 years. I started working with combat sports nutrition with actual former Marine Brian Stan. That's how we started. He was in the UFC. He started cutting weight, introduced me to John Jones, who was his training partner. And, John Jones got, with Dustin Poirier, and it just kind of blew up, kind of found a niche. Because what I did in the Marine Corps kind of translated well into the scene that I'm doing right now. And so here we are in beautiful New Zealand, just waiting for the upcoming fight.
Yeah, man. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? I mean, I know you guys don't necessarily have a fight scheduled at this point, but you and I were talking, man. It takes a while to get a fighter truly prepped from a strength and conditioning standpoint. So, time is on your side. But how long have you been out there at this point?
This time, I think we've been on here 2.5 months.
2.5 months. Got it. And I'm curious about your business model and kind of how you do things, because I know with your fighters, oftentimes you're out there living on site with them for months at a time during their fight camp. I mean, you're even, doing cooking for these guys. So, I'm just curious kind of what your year looks like. Is it typical for you to be on site with one athlete for an extended period, or are you during points of your year working with, multiple guys or doing remote coaching, any of that sort of thing?
Uh, but I left that there. During the Django fight, he called me out there. It was a 6-week camp. Everything went well. We connected very well. And then he said, what should we do from here? And I said, the best thing to do is if I go back, continue the nutrition. We come up with game plans. Basically what I did. And then here we are, So again, he's the only fighter that I said I'm going to stay with to the end of the career. This is unusual. Usually I go back and forth, fight to fight. We used to have the largest combat sports nutrition company in the world, is Lockhart and Lee. Our business plan basically is we train people up, and then when people called me, we would be able to send people out. And you know as well as I do, like sending somebody a fitness plan on a piece of paper is completely different than you sitting there watching them, like, okay, you need to bring your butt back more, your knees coming over your this, that you're not activating this muscle. You know, not everybody can afford that. So, obviously there's different lines, different levels, but the more people we trained, the less travel would come into play. So, we would train up 300-400 people, and they'd be all over the United States. So if somebody from New Mexico called, like, hey, I got somebody there, they wouldn't have to pay for plane tickets and, room and board or anything like that. And then, we do the nutrition aspect of it. For MMA, weight cutting is a huge aspect of the game. You can mess up a perfect camp over the course of 1 week if you do that incorrectly, not only the cut, but the rehydration process. But as of right now, because all my attention is to Joe, I have so much faith that he's going to take that undisputed. We're going to be breaking records here. We're not even looking at taking undisputed. We're trying to get undisputed and win it more times than anybody in history. I think the last was Mike Tyson. I think he defended it 5 times. So we're going to go for 6 and see if we can make history.
Hell yeah, man. Well, what does his overall team look like? I imagine there's a a number of guys involved. I'm sure he's got a fights coach, and what's the typical size of a team for one of these top fighters?
This is crazy. So usual size of a team, you have an entourage of just 10 people, 11 people. Joe's camp is me and Andy Lee. It's 3-man group. We keep it tight. The one thing that I have noticed, and I'm not saying this about every single camp or every single team, but you'll have strength and conditioning coaches that try and take the spotlight. You know what I mean? You got coaches that try and take the spotlight. You know, they're leeches, and they're not really there for the fight. They're there for the attention of things. And we're just like a band of brothers. We have one common goal. We keep it small. And having Joe's best interest at heart makes me and Andy work very well together. I work to supplement Andy. A lot of times, strength and conditioning coaches and head coaches don't get along because strength and conditioning coach is like, well, he should be doing this, da da da. Andy's like, well, this is the game plan. We need him to have movement for this fight. For when he fought Wilder, it was constant tension. He had to be on point, stay in the bucket the whole time, but it wasn't explosive. It wasn't doing a lot of movement. It was just ready, kind of like a spring. We had to train it specifically for that. For Piccoli, which we thought was going to be Dubois, like I said, we worked on explosiveness, so move, and then explode, which he definitely demonstrated. But he gives me the game plan. I come up with the tool or what we need to do to get his cardio there. And, Andy will come up to me and, we monitor everything. His HRV in the morning, I'll be like, hey, today would not be a good day for a hard sparring session. And he'd be okay. And then we adjust based on actual science, not on feelings, emotions, because you ask a fighter, like, how you feeling? The fighter's always going to be like, oh, I feel great, even though their body's not primed and ready. And you know that as well as I do. I use powerlifting a lot of the time. I'm like, powerlifters don't go into the gym just to pump out a workout. If they're not going to get stronger that day, if their chest or legs haven't fully recovered, they know it is absolutely pointless to try and go smash it again. Whereas boxers, they don't take any of that into consideration. Pain is progress, and a lot of these guys view, and that's the only tangible that they have to work off of.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of just some of the conflict you sometimes see between the strength coach, the sports coach themselves. Just my background in football, I mean, that's something we have to navigate, right? I mean, at the end of the day, these guys they're football players, right? They're not powerlifters or Olympic weightlifters. And although we want to, think that we really were the stars of the show, I mean, we gotta be in have a cohesive situation with the coaching staff, and ultimately, we are an accessory to the head football coach. So, I get a lot of that. And a lot of times the football coach doesn't want to hear when a strength coach tells them, hey, all the data, all their readiness assessment is saying that, we got to pull them back and pull back the practice load a little bit. So you ever find yourself in conflict with the fights coach? You might be saying, hey, we got to pull this guy back. And the fights coach is saying, no, we got to go. Is that a typical conflict between strength coach and fights coach in MMA and boxing?
I mean, I've done this so long, John, that I've learned to stay in my lane because it happens all the time. This is the only camp that I've actually worked in where we speak freely and it is progressive for the fighter,
Yeah.
Most of the time I've walked in on strength and conditioning and I just watch it. And I don't say anything because at the end of the day, he hired the guy for the strength and conditioning. So if I go in there and I'm like, he shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that, the fighter starts questioning themselves. They're not gonna fire the guy. So I just keep my mouth shut and I try and feed them to the best of my ability for whatever it is that they're doing. Now when I started working with Joe, it was all by accident. Let me just give you like just a downplay or the playbook of boxes. This is how this was. He's a world champion already at the time, right? I was doing his nutrition. We go to Ireland. And he's like, I'm going to go lift. And I was like, you mind if I go to the gym with you guys? I was going to go lift while they're there. Okay, sure. So we go into the gym and they start looking around. And, well, what do you want to do? He said, we'll do some lunges. And then they had this piece of paper and they were doing some exercises. And it's like, George, what's a bent over row? And I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, you're playing with me. There was no rhyme that they lifted because that's what you're supposed to do, like quote unquote. But there was no structure, there was no schedule, there was no goal. And then I started looking at the running, and it's like he was running 30 minutes a day. And I was like, why are you running? What pace you running? I would just go out and run 30 minutes a day. And that's what they would do for cardio. And then they go box. And that was it. And I've noticed that all the way around the boxing community, man. This is why I was so confident that Joe was like, his career skyrocketed. And I feel that if people actually paid attention and looked into this aspect, that it would change their game. But yeah, like, I'm sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but to answer your question, I've never had this before. I've always stayed in my lane. Head coach does his thing. The strength and conditioning coach did his thing. My only thing was like, Coach, what are you guys doing today? He would tell me, and I would make sure that fighter was fed to the best of my ability, proper, to whatever training they had scheduled. And here's the crazy thing, man. 9 times out of 10, they would tell me something, and then they wouldn't even do it. I would load a guy up, and then it's like, oh yeah, we didn't, we were supposed to do a 10-round sparring. We ended up doing shadow boxing for 3 minutes. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
I'm sure you understand the frustration.
Oh yeah, very much so. Well, I'm curious, with fighters, does it with a typical training week, are you typically doing 2-a-days where maybe you're doing weights in the morning, they're sparring and doing skills work in the afternoon, or is it, strength and conditioning one day and all fight work on another day? What does that kind of weekly split often look like for guys?
So I'll give you Joe's now, and it constantly changes because, when I first started working with him, John, I tell you, he's a heavyweight. And I put him on military, like just dumbbell military press. I was trying to get an assessment of his just basic strength. 20 kilograms, bro. He couldn't lift 20 kgs. Like, yeah. And Joe messes with me a lot, dude. He just plays with me. And I was like, oh, I was laughing and I'm like, oh shit, he's serious. Like, oh, he couldn't lift this up. So we did a whole block. It was 3 months of strength training, just basics. Compound lifts, squats, military press, and I did a lot of incline, bench, stuff like that to get everything up before we actually got into any specificity for the sport. Now, he's as strong as an ox. Now what we're doing, obviously we're working endurance, but aerobic capacity is something that these guys don't actually concentrate on. Aerobic capacity is, I tell Joe, like, all boxing does, they work on the anaerobic threshold. And I tell them, like, that could only increase in fractions. Your VO2 max fractions, a lot of that's genetic, that as well as I do. But aerobic capacity, you can grow. And I was like, when you engage with a boxer and you guys have your bursts, you have your combinations, that is important to be able to deal with that. But when you step back, if your heart rate drops faster than his drops over the course of a 12-round fight, it's insane of how much difference you're going to make. So, like I said, when I started working with Joe, he was running an hour. Right now, he runs an hour first thing every morning on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. He runs an hour and a half on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. We're talking about a heavyweight. This guy puts in mileage. And then in the evenings, we'll do, when we're doing strength training, we had blocks. It was almost like a powerlifting. He would do one body part per week. Now we'd hit it hard. 3 to 5 minute rest in between long sessions. Right now, I don't like CrossFit or anything like that. He's working more, and we're doing a lot of anaerobic stuff. I want to be able to keep him moving over the course of time with a consistent amount of weight. So right now, in the evenings on Mondays, we'll do an anaerobic workout. It'll usually last about 40, 45 minutes. Obviously not anaerobic the entire time. Wednesday, we're building up the upper body, the shoulders and back. We don't do a lot of boxing training during these splits between the fights. Reason being is once they start fight camp, they're punching. And what happens is that girdle starts rolling forward. It puts a lot of tension on the joints. So I give them that time to rest. I'll work a lot of biomechanics. And on Fridays we do core training, which is hilarious because every boxer in every boxing gym that I went to, they go in and they do these crunches. They just do thousands of crunches, and it's just like worst form ever. Now, I told Joe, I was like, the purpose of your core is to keep your spine erect. You know what I mean? And never in boxing are you ever going to crunch down. If you do that, that means you're tired. If you see a guy bowled over, he's exhausted, his core's not activated. I'm like, when you do these crunches, you're doing exactly the opposite of what your core is supposed to do. It's supposed to keep you straight, it's supposed to keep you erect. And they thought like, you could do core every day. I started doing core. We do core on Fridays, and they're like, there's no way in hell that we could do core every single day. You know, but the core to me is extremely important because, you know, I try to demonstrate with these fighters that every movement you make has a stability muscle and has a mobility muscle. The more you're able to stabilize, the faster those arms can swing. Then realize that when we swing a punch, the reason you're getting exhausted isn't because that arm movement. It's because your body has got to tighten everything up to protect the back in order to throw that punch. So
Right.
that's what we do the Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It's not a lot, you know, I'm not trying to do a lot of high intensity training day after day after day. A lot of these guys don't realize that, you know, if you do more than 3 intensity, your body's not recovering. The aerobic is, you know, they can do every day. We've built up to it. I would never throw a fighter and have him doing the amount of running that Joe does, but he built that over the time. So that's, you know, kind of like a basis of where we're at right now, but that'll change depending on what blocks we work. We'll work more the ATP system the closer he gets to the fight because, you know, we're working on speed. You'll do like, you know, 5-second sprints. You know, we'll do bouts with the punches. And the one thing that, you know, I know football is a lot better. Boxing is absolutely horrible. I was like, you know, if you took Usain Bolt and you had him sprint 100 meters and the coach was like, okay, do it again. Do it again. Do it again. I'm like, you think that's the way they're training you? I'm like, they're gonna break down the biomechanics. Like, okay, your arms, your left arm's moving to, you know, so on and so forth. Nobody breaks down the biomechanics of a boxer's punch. They'll just be like, combination, boom, boom, do it again, boom, boom. And they'll be like, keep your hands up. And that's all they do. Where I'm telling Joe's like, you got to move your head to this center. Your arms got to be here. And that's the correct biomechanics, pushing off this leg, so on and so forth. It's real educational, but I think that's definitely given them a lot of confidence going into the fights and gives us a lot to work on. So,
Yeah, you know, are a lot of other boxers and fighters are sort of still stuck in the dark ages when it comes to this sort of training? I mean, I know you mentioned when you start working with some of these guys, it's like they're looking at some of these basic exercises like they've never heard of them. Is it becoming more common to have more high level strength and conditioning for fighters, or is it still a mixed bag? Some guys are just super old school and stuck in the dark ages.
I would say more than 95% of them are stuck in the old school way of boxing. You know, you get up, 99% of them don't. I was blown away. I was like, wait, what? I thought I was like boxing 101. No, jump rope isn't a big thing. It's jogging, pad work, you know, and that's it. And it's like they think that, okay, if I do pad work and I tell them to punch faster, their body's going to start punching faster. You know, I was like, if I try to break things down. I use a lot of analogies, but I tell Joe, I was like, if I'm a guy and I want to pack on muscle, I was like, and I start eating more protein, my body's not going to be like, you know what? We need more muscle. I was like, we have to create a stimulus. Your body's got to, like, everything your body does is based off of stimulus. So if there's no stimulus, you can give it all the protein in the world. It's not just going to pack on muscle. I'm like, just because I tell my body to move faster, it's not going to move faster. I have to give it that stimulus. I think understanding that helped them out a lot, you know, and, you know, in boxers' defense, though, the strength and conditioning coaches, man, they're glorified PTs. You know what I mean? I have nothing against a PT. It's for general public, though. You know, if I've taught the body to, you know, get stronger legs, be more aesthetically pleasing, that's great. But with boxing, it's a chain. You know, you have to know if I'm throwing a right uppercut, if I push that right arm as hard as I can, it can only do so much. But it's the pulling of the left arm that creates that chain and creates that uppercut. And I have to have specific exercises that work chains, connectivity for punching. And 99% of PTs don't know that. So every time a boxer gets the strength and conditioning coach, they're hearing the same old things over and over again. They're just doing, 10 sets of, or 10 to 12 repetitions, 4 sets, so on and so forth. Whereas with Joe, he's like, dude, it's constantly, and, not to go overboard here, but when I started bulking Joe up, he didn't realize that not only does the lifting change, but the food changes. He was like, dude, I can't eat all this, man. I'm like, give it time, And then after a while, I couldn't feed the guy enough. But they eat the same. They do the same training, whether who they're fighting, what they're doing. It's the same thing in, same thing out. And I don't know how they don't get tired of that crap, man. I get so bored. It'd be crazy.
Yeah. Are there any concerns when it comes to putting muscle on fighters? Whether it's losing mobility, okay, they've got more muscle mass they're carrying, so that adds a more difficult conditioning component to things. And I'm sure a guy like Joseph Parker, when you first get him on the dumbbell military press and he's doing, he's not weight room strong. I'm sure as soon as you get him into, 6 weeks deep into a program, he's just easily blows up with muscle. Is that a concern at all for some of these fighters in a negative way?
Oh, man. Absolutely. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and they're like, hey, fighter's got to fight 2 months. He needs to pack on some muscle, so on and so forth. Me and you both know, like, since a lot of these guys aren't weight room strong, they can put on considerable amount of muscle in a shorter period of time. Someone like you that's been lifting your whole life, you're not just going to automatically just blow up. But they don't understand. It's like muscle consumes more oxygen than fat. So that extra muscle, you're going to be breathing heavy. If that muscle's not being used, it's more of a hindrance than a benefit. Mobility, it's like, that's one of the biggest things I work on with boxers. Like I said, their girdle's so jacked up. Their shoulders are always rolled forward. I'll start doing some mobility tests with them. With Joe, I told him, I'm like, this takes time. When we had with Zhang, after the Zhang fight, Joe weighed 245 pounds and Zhang weighed 290. This last fight, Joe weighed in at 267 pounds. Better conditioned, ran longer, harder. His mobility was better. His movement was better. But it took us 10 months. And you know as well as I do that there's no way that, we didn't pack that wasn't all muscle. But it took that long. If I'll tell people, if you don't have at least a 4-month stint, a 4-month break, trying to pack on muscle is not going to be beneficial for you at all. Because like you said, mobility, conditioning, all that together, while building the muscle, it's a pain in the butt. I had Joe running at least an hour still every day while we're packing on muscle. What I know is in bodybuilding world, that's big no, but in terms of the athletic community, it's huge that we keep that aerobic capacity up.
Yeah, it's always interesting looking at athletes. You look at a boxer like Tyson Fury, who you look at his physique and you would never think this guy is an elite athlete. Or even, in football, you look at some of these offensive linemen who just look like, just soft-bodied fat guys at times. And, it's not always about the amount of muscle mass that the guys carry that make them great at what they do. For a boxer, could be just having tremendous aerobic capacity. Like you said, the connectivity, just that power and coordination to just have elite power behind their strike, reflexes, contact balance. There's so many things that make these types of athletes good at what they do outside of just carrying muscle mass. So, it's always kind of a misconception that the general population has that strength and conditioning for athletes is, just put it on muscle and just traditional powerlifting and all that sort of thing.
Amen. You're 100% right on that one.
Well, we've been talking about training here for the duration of the podcast so far. And I introed this saying we're going to go into nutrition, and I want to take things there. I'm just curious, what does a typical day look like for you? I know you're involved in the cooking and in all of his meals. So when you're in the heat of fight camp, what's a typical day look like for you, from a nutrition standpoint?
Man, it's sexy. I'll tell you. You get up, you cook breakfast. Typically, we'll go to the gym, do a training session. So you'll have breakfast, you'll make a pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout, come back, have lunch. Usually after lunch, go to the grocery store. Uh, then we do a snack. Now, like a lot of this stuff, it seems so simple. No, it is simple. I'm not saying it's super difficult, but it's calculated. For example, let's say he has a hard training session in the evening, like a sparring session. The pre-workout is what we're trying to find out that he's going to have pre-fight. So let's say we have it 3 hours before the sparring session, and he feels a little bit low, little light. We maybe want to increase the proportion size, change the food, or bring it closer to the actual time of the sparring session. So we use this time during fight camp to find out, okay, what foods work well with them, what time and the amount, and we calculate that. So we'll have this, pre-workout snack for Joe. We'll do Greek yogurt. We'll do a little bit of granola, and we'll do like berries and things like that. And then I'll usually top it off with Manuka honey. We get to training again, pre, intra, post. They have dinner, go grocery shopping one more time, wake up, do it all over again. And that's the sexy life of George Lockhart.
Yeah. Well, are you doing all this cooking yourself? Or are you outsourcing a chef? Does he have his own chef, or is this all you behind the stove?
It's all me. Yeah, I do all the cooking and strength conditioning, and so I'm in the kitchen a lot. I love cooking. It's so therapeutic. If you would have told me 20 years ago that I'd be doing this for a living, I wouldn't have believed you. But I love it, man. It's awesome, and it's great because you know as well as I do, when you cook your own food, you know exactly what's going in there. If you outsource it, people be there. I put a little bit of oil. A little bit of oil to some people is not a little bit of oil. The seasoning, salt. I know it's like, I put extra salt in it this morning, and a lot of people don't realize like the amount of sodium that I give Joe is astronomical. Salt has got such a bad rep, but I know with powerlifting, you guys, I know you guys use it a lot. It's so important if you're training. But knowing exactly how much is going into everything, I'm not second guessing. I don't have to worry about the chef understanding exactly what I'm saying. Take care of everything.
Yeah, and you touch on the salt. One thing that athletes tend to way under consume, in my opinion, is potassium. Right, just the pre, intra, and post workout electrolyte intake tends to often be lacking with some of these guys. Is electrolyte intake in general a big consideration for you, especially around the training window with these fighters?
Oh, absolutely. You're 100% right. The average American, in terms of potassium, like their omega-6, omega-3 ratios, 15-1. Potassium and sodium ratios are just ridiculous. I cook almost everything in bowl for Joe, which will definitely add a lot of sodium to it. But a lot of stuff that I'll be preparing for him, I do tons of peppers, tons of potatoes. I equal everything out, especially, and then is post-workout shakes. You'll get sodium, but you'll get like a lot of coconut water. It's funny because people seem to be on one end of the spectrum or the other. They'll just drink coconut water. They think they're hydrating themselves. I'm like, oh, you need the salt. You get the coconut water, you get all the potassium, none of the salt. Everything is based on ratios. They've done studies of people with like high blood pressure, and people automatically assume like, oh, you got to drop the sodium. They found out that it's not the sodium, but the lack of potassium. It's the ratio. So if you have a high level of sodium and a high level of potassium, blood pressure is completely normal. Everything's completely fine. So to answer your question, yes, I do. I do everything mostly in food. Like I don't do a lot of supplementation via protein. He will do Joe will do a casein protein before runs in the morning. Studies will show that it increases fat oxidation by about 30%. But a lot of these people, they'll take protein shakes after they're done working out. And, I tell people, I'm like, when it comes down to energy sources, your body uses fat and your body uses carbohydrates. After a workout, everybody's refueling with protein. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense unless you are a bodybuilder. And I think people take aspects from another sport and they try and apply it to every sport. And so with Joe, the amount of carbohydrates will be dependent on the workout, the length of the workout, the intensity of the workout. Like with me, we have certification. We have a formula for everything. So I'll literally give a formula to tell you exactly how many calories you burn, and then from that formula, I'll be able to tell you how many of those calories are carbohydrates and proteins and fats. So, for example, if you go and you burn 1,000 calories jogging, and you burn 1,000 calories lifting, you burn 1,000 for both, but you don't refuel them the same way. The jogging, you burn more fat, you don't refuel the fat. But with the lifting, you have to replenish the glycogen. So yeah, we do that all specifically. I make sure that the electrolytes are in balance, micronutrients, macronutrients, everything is calculated to the T. Now, Joe being a heavyweight makes things a lot easier for me. He doesn't have to make weight or anything like that. But still, excess weight's never good. And you're gonna see, like, come September, Joe is going to be shredded. Not because I care about his aesthetics, but it's a byproduct of the type of training that we're doing. And, we're trying to make him as fast as possible. So I'm getting as much fat off as we can to do that.
Right. When you're working with a fighter who does need to make weight, are you trying to diet off a good bit of that weight on the front end in terms of losing body fat? Or are you keeping them relatively heavy throughout the camp and really just water cutting on the back end? Or do you have them in a deficit for, a duration of the camp?
So, like most nutritionists, you have the laws of thermodynamics, energy in, energy out, calories in, calories out. But the problem is that everybody concentrates on the calories in, right? And as a general nutritionist, with the general populace, I can understand why, because you can't be like, if somebody's on their desk, a majority of their life, you can't be like, okay, go run 3 miles, go run 6 miles or whatever. You have to worry about, okay, we got to deplete the calories coming in. But as an athlete, I want to increase the amount of calories going out. I always use the analogy of a car. So if you're driving a car and you're getting ready for a race, you fuel the car up less, you're going to drive it more, and you expect performance to increase. It's not going to happen. You have to put a bigger engine in the car. If you put a bigger engine in the car, it uses fuel more proficiently. Performance goes up, weight goes down. So I don't pull the calories. What I do is I concentrate on increasing the performance. As the performance increases, the weight will go down. Now, are they at a deficit? Absolutely. The problem is, though, is people put them at a deficit at first. What happens is the performance drops. Once performance drops, the only way to get weight off more is cut calories again. And I'll see a lot of these guys, by the time fight week comes, they're not eating anything, man. Their body's dragging ass, their metabolism shot to shit, and they're not losing any weight. Whereas you try to keep the calories as high as possible, performance goes up. That makes the weight cut so much easier. It leans them out, and they're eating a lot more by the time they get to fight week.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, you're creating a calorie deficit for some of these guys, but you're not creating that deficit by reducing calories necessarily. You're creating the deficit by increasing the calories out, which of course makes a lot of sense. I'm a big proponent of that. It's, let's diet as much body fat off as we can while keeping calories as high as possible for as long as possible, right? That way we can keep your metabolism high. We can keep performance intact. We're not risking losing muscle tissue during this whole process. Everyone wants to jump the gun and just reduce calories too much too soon. And then next thing they know, their metabolism is down regulated. They hit a body weight plateau. They don't have any more calories to reduce, and the performance has gone to shit. And now they've put themselves in a bad spot.
Yes, 100%. Said a lot more eloquently than I do.
Well, I'm a podcast host. I've got to keep my speaking polished. When you first start working with the fighter, what does that nutrition assessment kind of look like, right? Are you doing a needs assessment, looking at, okay, do we need to improve this guy's body composition? How many calories are we starting this guy on? What is sort of that onboarding process look like as you learn their body, figure out what they need, what foods they respond well to, this and that? I'm curious what that initial process looks like.
Yeah. So the big thing back in the day, you tried a lot of people in Marine Corps, we had a thing called, KISS. I'm sure you heard it, keep it simple, stupid. And I overcomplicated everything. It's like getting blood work and, like, look, okay, what they have deficits in. Well, is it they have a deficit because their diet's off? As well as you get blood work 3 times a day, you're going to get 3 different responses.
Yeah.
So it's like, why am I adjusting to that specific blood work? Let me give the body what it needs when it needs it. And then from there, we find deficiencies. So basically what I'll do is I'll take a look at their training schedule. Based on their training schedule, their weight, size, and goals, we'll give the body what it needs when it needs it. So tomorrow, let's say you have a hard training session. If you have a hard training session tomorrow, I load people up with carbohydrates today so their body is loaded for tomorrow. I'm not trying to load them up. Obviously, if they're training later in the night, what they eat in the morning, their body will use. But a lot of times, if you're doing 2-a-days, I don't have that opportunity. So I'll load you up today, tomorrow, look at the intensity, duration of every workout, give the body what it needs. Now, what's going to happen is over the course of a week or two, you're going to start seeing, we'll start seeing deficiencies, like they're getting tired at specific times. They're not feeling strong in the workout. They're not sleeping well. I'll take their weight first thing every morning, right before they go to bed every night. So the water intake obviously is extremely important. So I'll find out how much they're floating. And a lot of times, guys, say somebody's floating 2 kilos a night. Then one night they go to 1 kilo and they've drank the same amount of water. Everything's the same. I didn't give them a super high sodium, intake or anything like that. They cut back. They're getting sick. Inflammation's coming from somewhere. And, you start learning too, like, I know Tyson won't get upset, but like Tyson, every time he worked out or did like an anaerobic workout, he would gain 2 pounds. And, I realized when he lifted, the way he was lifting, it was causing a lot of inflammation. His body would hold on a lot. He was doing aerobic work. That was the case. He would drop pretty easily. And it's funny for a lot of guys that I do because, every gram of glycogen holds on to 3 grams of water. So typically, if you do a hard anaerobic workout and you deplete your glycogen storage, you should be lighter the next day. And I find that pretty common with most guys, but some people I find out. So to me, I'm saying inflammation isn't necessarily a bad thing. We know you need specific amount of inflammation, but if my body's causing so much inflammation that I'm gaining kilograms of weight overnight, something needs to change, whether it's the diet or the type of training.
With any of the guys you've worked with, have you seen some crazy metabolisms, guys who just vaporize through glycogen? You have to do, huge carb refeeds. With me working with some of these strongman competitors, I mean, I'm having to do, 1,500 gram carb days with some of these guys just to replenish them, and just at the size that they're. Yeah, I mean, when you're working with 400 pounders who, performance enhancing drugs are in play, and these guys vaporize through glycogen like crazy. But yeah, had you worked with some piece of metabolisms? Guys, thank you for tuning in and supporting the podcast. I just wanted to take a minute to give a shout out over to my guys at Troponin Supplements. So they're the sponsor of the podcast, and in my opinion, they carry the best supplements on the market, and it's not even close. And they're the one company that I've wanted to align myself with. As a nutrition coach working with NFL football players, other professional athletes, strongman competitors, bodybuilders, powerlifters, fitness enthusiasts, endurance athletes, I have to be very particular about any supplement company I endorse. And with Troponin Supplements, frankly, it was a no-brainer. These are the products I've been using myself for the last few years before I ever became involved with the company. I know the owner personally, Justin Harris. He is one of the brilliant minds in the bodybuilding industry, and we've talked, and all he has wanted to do is just bring some of the elite top-of-the-line products to the market, and that's what he's done. So these are the products I recommend and endorse to all my athletes, all my clients. I use myself, and I want to pass this along to you guys as well. So I'm going to highlight a couple products here. First and foremost, We've got the ATP. This is a high dose of caffeine paired with a very powerful nootropic. I take this before work. I take this before I podcast. This is going to give you a great boost in mood, in focus, memory enhancement. You're just going to feel like you took the Limitless pill when you use ATP. It's an effervescent tablet. You drop it in your water, it dissolves, tastes great. The next product, Field Rations. This is the premier intra-workout supplement on the market right now. It's a one-stop shop for all your intra-workout needs. It's based in highly branched cyclic dextrin, contains essential amino acids, electrolytes, tastes amazing. I use this within every training session. Then we've got the Suppressor Max. This is awesome for controlling your blood sugar. It's got a high dose of berberine, but then has complementary ingredients that are going to keep the berberine bioavailable and stay in your system longer. This is the best blood sugar product on the market. If you're bulking, if you're eating a ton of food, if you're using a cheat meal, this is a great product for you. And then finally, I love this one. I've always had sleep issues. Hit the Rack. This is one of the best sleep products I've ever tried. I use it about 30 minutes before bed most nights, and this has been the one supplement that has actually helped me fall asleep and stay asleep. And then of course, we got the Troponin T logo bodybuilding jersey and the hat. We've got great apparel on the site. So guys, check out Troponin supplements. You can find the link in the show notes, in the bio, or you can simply just Google Troponin supplements. Use code HECK, capital HECK, at checkout for a discount. Check them out, guys. These are some of the best products on the market.
Yeah, dude, Connor, man, he was, I don't know what the heck, his body's crazy, but for me, typically, I'll take like a pre-workout snack, about 2.5 hours, if it's light. I would load Connor up with, I'm talking loads of potatoes for breakfast, just tons of carbs. He can go train 30 minutes after he's done, like eating it, like no problem whatsoever, come back, load him up again, like carbs. He was so carb adapted, it was ridiculous. 90% of fighters that I work with like that, obviously I'm trying to keep up protein for the thermogenic effect. They didn't do that. With Connor, fighting, because he was fighting at 145 when we first met. I was giving him about 350, 400 grams a day. For somebody at 145, man, that's cutting down. That's a lot. It sounds minuscule after hearing 1,500 grams a day, but
well, I'm working with monsters on the other end of the body weight spectrum. I'm cutting myself right now, and I mean I'm losing weight on 750 grams of carbs right now. Just it just different types of humans.
You're big.
Well, with these fighters, are they receptive to the nutrition plan? Honestly, working in football, it was so hard to get a lot of these guys bought into nutrition. A lot of them are picky. It's like pulling teeth trying to get them to follow a diet plan. With fighters, is it like that, or are these guys just a different culture? They're just willing to suffer. They're willing to eat whatever, and they roll with it.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I see from your point of view, until somebody's suffered because of nutrition, they don't believe in nutrition. Until somebody's been through a weight cut where they literally thought they were going to die, they're just like, you know what? I don't give a shit if you're giving me, free spinach and squash every meal, I'll eat it because, if that's what it takes to make this easier. And a lot of times that's when I usually got the call. It was the last minute call. We were just like, dude, I can't get this weight off. And then at that point, juncture time, they will listen to everything that you say. The problem is, you face the same thing. Outside of the weight cut, they're like, okay, the weight cut, I got to eat perfectly. But then outside of it, they don't realize how much that affects performance and everything else. The one thing that I'm lucky enough is, I fought, a little over 12 years, is being able to tell somebody how they feel before they tell you. Like, tell me what you're eating, tell me what you're doing. And then you're, all right, you're feeling like this at this time. And they're like, yeah, man, how'd you know that? It's like, the only way to know that is through nutrition. Is, it's definitely helped me a lot in my career. And I'm sure the same with you, is you've walked the path so you understand what they're going through. There's a lot of nutritionists that they've never fought before. So they don't know what they're going through. They don't know what they're feeling. So they're kind of playing it by ear. And to tell you the truth, like I always ask people, I'm like, why would you hire a nutritionist? Because a nutritionist they go to school. I'll tell you what, they never, okay, today we're going to talk about cutting 30 pounds in 3 days. There's never a section on that for them at all. They don't learn how to do that. It's a very specific thing. And unless someone like yourself, you've done bodybuilding too?
Yeah. Yep. Bodybuilding, powerlifting,
Yeah, I was
strongman,
just saying, like,
football.
bro, like you get those. I always tell people like powerlifting, or I'm sorry, bodybuilding. I'm like, these guys know how to take their bodies to the extreme. You take the best of every single, sport. It's like, okay, they perfected this, and understanding how to implement it into our sport and then go through the sport yourself. You can't beat that. I always tell people you got theoretical knowledge, you have empirical knowledge. If you find somebody that has got both, then you're lucky. And a lot of these fighters, they talking to them and relating to them, that's my best accord. I am in a part of my career now where I'm lucky enough where, and I know you know this, you're just like, you're just not ready. Somebody's like, I can't eat that. I'll be like, good luck. You know what I'm saying? And I'll be like, call me in a couple years when you are ready, because
Yeah.
if they can't even hear what I'm telling them to do, once they actually start eating it, they're not going to follow through.
Yeah, no, and just you having been a fighter and like me with my guys having competed in strongman and played football, they tend to trust you more, right? They just have that connection with you, right? You've gone through what they've gone through. There's the trust component between whether it's coach, athlete, nutritionist, and athlete. You need to have that intangible trust factor. And so much of nutrition is psychological, right? It's finding ways to get the athlete bought in. And I'm sure your fighters are way more bought into you because they respect the fact that you fought. Just in the same way, my football guys respect me because they know I played, and my strongman competitors and bodybuilders respect me because I've walked that path myself. So, I'm sure you probably need to develop a good rapport with these guys outside of just being, good with the X's and O's of nutrition. Do you find it's important to build a good relationship with your fighters?
Oh, bro, you hit the nail on the head. The psychological factors of church, I think, are the most important for a coach. Like, for us to tell people what to eat, that's not hard at all, bro. Like, if somebody came to you and was like, I want to get lean, you're like, grilled chicken, lettuce, avocado, have this meal and eat this 3 times a day. You know what I'm saying? I'm just kind of giving you like a general step. That's not hard. And if they ate that, would they lose body fat? Absolutely. It's getting them to do it. I'll say simplicity and consistency is the keys to everything. And getting somebody to believe, that's everything. Because you've been there, you've been that route before, 6-pack, it's like, if you lose your 6-pack, you know how to get it back. Like a day goes by, you're like, well, you don't eat one day of this food and know you're going to have your 6-pack back, but because you have belief, you're like, I eat this way, 5-6 weeks, 6-pack to me back. Somebody that's never had that before, they don't have that belief. So they like, what do you believe in? Because you can't see the results. At first they have to have that belief in you. You have to give them that belief. And then I would say a good coach gets people to believe in them. A great coach gets you to believe in yourself. And it takes time. Like you say, getting that rapport is, and the one thing I think that Joe's, I always tell them things before they happen. Tomorrow you're going to feel like this. You're going to feel like this in training. And it's funny because like in sparring, I'll be like, dude, 3rd round, you're going to stay. And sure enough, you'd be like, bro, how do you know that? Yeah. And when I was teaching classes, that's the one thing I always tell people. I'm like, you always tell them before, you never tell them after the fact. The people's like, man, I'm feeling tired. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's normal because X, Y, and Z. They're going to think you're full of crap. But when you tell them beforehand, they're like, oh, he said I was going to feel like this. It gives them that comfort level, gives them that trust. But you better know what you're doing. If you're able to do that, you have to know what you're doing.
No, I think that's a great point. Just having that knowledge and foresight to predict how they're going to feel, how their body's going to respond to any intervention that you're giving them, and just telling them beforehand. So then when it happens, they're like, oh yeah, George said this was going to happen. And then now they're even more bought into you because they're like, how did he know? And then, they're just more bought into it. And I get that with a lot of my guys. Like you said, try to, I tell them why we're doing this. And okay, here's how I suspect your body's going to respond once we do this. Like, okay, with this big carb refeed, you're going to pull in a lot of extra water weight. Don't be, your weight's going to spike up here. So don't be surprised when the scale jumps up 5 pounds. It's going to come back down, especially with the bodybuilders, they get a little bit, scale centric, but being able to tell them ahead of time, I think that's a great point for sure. Now I would like to get into just some of the weight cut science, the water cutting. That's something you've been known for, and I know it's a big part of what you have to do with a lot of these fighters, especially in MMA. I know you've done some crazy water cuts. So when you're working with a guy who they have to make weight, is there a certain amount of weight or a percentage of weight that you're comfortable cutting? Or, do you feel like, okay, I've got to get this guy down to at least this body weight before we attempt this water cut to make weight? Or, what's your what's the maximum you're willing to water cut a guy?
Yeah, honestly, when I was working with the UFC and working with MMA fighters, there was no amount that I wouldn't show up for. Reason being is because I know if I wasn't there, they're going to attempt it on their own. There was times I showed up, but I'm like, I know for a fact that this guy's not going to make weight, but I want to be there. When I saw the symptoms, osmolality, blood pressure so low that they're losing, feeling their extremities. A coach a lot of times would be like, no, they just got to suck it up. They got to push through. When they have somebody there that's kind of like the mediator saying, like, bro, he is done. He is not going any further. You need somebody there, and I would show up for that. In terms of percentage, a lot of times it could be misconstrued because, fat is hydrophobic. It doesn't attach to water. So if I have a guy that's morbidly obese, he's got a lot more fat, then I got a guy that comes in and he's yoked, just low body fat percentage, has a lot of muscle. That muscle holds on to a lot of water. Like I've said before, every kilogram of lean muscle tissue holds on to 13 grams of glycogen. And every gram of glycogen holds on to 3 grams of water. So the more muscle you have, the more glycogen that we're able to deplete. The more glycogen you're able to deplete, the more water is going to come off with that glycogen. So a lot of times people would see someone jacked and be like, dude, where are you going to get the weight from? And I'm just looking at their muscles and I'm like, baby, that's all water, man. We're going to get rid of that. Yeah. So I wouldn't say an actual percentage of the overall weight without looking at the person. It'd be dependent on their muscle mass. But I will tell you, looking at people, I'd be like, okay, this is going to be a lot easier, or this could be a lot more difficult. It had nothing to do with how much they had to lose, but their body composition.
Can you, that's an interesting point. Just, the difficulty of the water cut really coming down to their body composition. I mean, like you said, the guy who's leaner and carrying a ton of muscle tissue, all that glycogen, all that water, you're going to be able to pull a ton of weight off in a short period of time. Do you mind, just for my audience, going into some of the basic science of water cutting, just kind of what you're trying to ultimately get the body to do, just some of the simple science behind it, and RAS system, things like that?
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of a loaded question. A loaded question, I know.
No, yeah, I do. I know. I love that you know that too. A lot of people come up to me like, "Hey, could you just tell me how to weight cut?" I'm like, man, I do courses. I'll talk 9 hours a day for two days straight to answer that one question. But in a basic level, I always tell people, your body doesn't have a brain. If your body had a brain, it would know that you can go to the store anytime you want to get food. So there'd be no reason to hold on to body fat. The only thing that your body has is negative feedback signals or any just signals at all. Like I said, to add muscle, your body there's got to be a stimulus that's created for your body to be like, oh, wait, I need to add more muscle because there's a new stimulus that's being created on the body. You walk out into the desert, the stimulus is heat. Your body's like, whoop, I'm going to overheat. So what does it do? It starts sweating. There's a triage effect that takes place, though. Your body's designed to survive. over a course of time, if you're in the desert and your body's like cool off, and then your body's like, wait a minute, there's no water coming back in. What's more imminent threat, dehydration or overheating? At that point, like you talk about your RAS system, right? The renin-angioaldosterone system basically is designed to start pulling sodium and water back into the body. Vasopressin hormone that's designed, it's antidiuretic hormone, pull water back into the body. What I have to do is try and circumvent these systems and try to keep the negative feedback signals down as much or as long as possible. One thing that I notice, a lot of people, when they cut weight, they automatically go straight to the sauna. They'll go out 5 days out from the sauna. And I tell people, if you've ever seen that movie or that show, it's called Naked and Afraid. Have you ever seen that show? Yeah, it's a classic. But you see the guys, 21 days in the wilderness, right? And then it'll be like, Jody lost 15 pounds. James lost freaking 21 pounds. And I'm like, that's 21 days. And they still didn't lose the amount of weight that you got to lose, bro. So we know that starving isn't going to get us there. And I try to keep everything mathematical. To lose 1 pound, we know we have to be at a deficit of 3,500 calories. So I tell fighters, I'm like, okay, let's say you only had 10 pounds to lose. 10 pounds, that means you have to be at a deficit of 35,000 calories. Okay, we have 3 days. So even if you didn't eat anything at all, you're still not going to make weight because you wouldn't reach that deficit that your body needs in order to drop the body fat or the weight needed. So everything does have to be water weight. So I have to tell the body and trick the body, saying, okay, number one, we need to get rid of this water because heat is a threat. If heat's a threat for over a long period of time, your body's going to shut down. You're not going to sweat at all. So like you said, it does have to be quick. And the cut itself, like the actual water cut, it doesn't start until maybe the night before weigh-ins. If it's early morning weigh-in, we might start late that night and then finish early that morning. If it's a later evening, I won't start the weight cut till that morning of the weight cut. It's got to be quick before the body realizes, like, oh shit, no water's coming back into the system. So the first thing that we do is, let's say the weigh-in is on Friday. We don't do anything until Tuesday. Tuesday, we start cutting out the salt. You cut out salt too long, your body is going to actually start pulling in salt back in. And I'm sure you know this with bodybuilders. A lot of these guys, they cut salt freaking weeks out, and it's not going to be beneficial at all. The only thing that's going to hinder is their lifting abilities. 3 days out, we cut the sodium. That's going to give me a number in terms of how much we're going to lose in terms of actual water weight from carbohydrates. So we have glycogen. So basically, with the formula, I'll take somebody's lean body mass, and from the lean body mass, only 40% of that is actual lean muscle tissue. So if you got a guy who's 200 pounds, 10% body fat, they're 180 pounds of lean body mass. A lot of guys are like, wow, I'm 180 pounds of muscle. No, that's lean body mass. Only 40% of that is actual the tissue. Once you find out the amount of lean muscle tissue, then you find out that each kilogram of lean muscle tissue holds on to 13 grams of glycogen. So you take that, you divide that by 2.2, multiply that by 13. Now I know the total amount of lean muscle tissue glycogen that the body holds. Now I'm going to multiply that by 4. The reason I multiply that by 4, not 3, is because I got to take into account the 3 grams of water glycogen, but I also got to take into account the actual glycogen, the gram of glycogen itself. So I multiply that by 4. That gives me the total glycogen and water attached to glycogen. Now, your muscles hold glycogen, but your liver also holds glycogen as well. 20% of overall glycogen. So once I get the total glycogen of muscle, I multiply that by 20, and I do the same thing with the liver glycogen as I did with the muscle glycogen. That's going to give me total glycogen. When I multiply that by 4, that's going to give me a specific number. And you multiply that by, I think it's 456.3. That's going to give you the amount of pounds that the individual is going to lose just by cutting carbohydrates. It's extremely important because let's say they have 15 pounds to lose and I do this math. It's like, okay, in essence, once the carbs are gone, this is how much water weight that we're going to have to lose. And the water weight is going to be dependent on one thing, the stimulus of heat. So, The next thing we want to do is with osmosis. A lot of people don't realize that your body's always trying to keep a constant state of homeostasis, balance. If I have an excess amount of sodium, my body's going to end up holding on to water, right? Reason being is because it wants to stay balanced. But if I drink a ton of water, and this is where a lot of people don't understand about water loading. I've heard people being like, you go to the sauna, you drink water because you're training your body to sweat. It's absolute nonsense. Your body knows how to freaking sweat. The thing is when I drink a ton of water, and this is where a lot of fighters get pissed at you because they're like, I just worked out and I lost, 5 pounds. And now you want me to drink water again? But yes, because when you drink water, water goes up. But when you pee and when you sweat, the sodium goes down. So when you get rid of this water, that goes down again. Drink water again, sweat, pee, everything, that the sodium keeps going down. Once the sodium is down low by let's say it's Friday weigh in, Thursday, the sodium's going to be down as low as we can go. At this point, we obviously have to take care, their vital signs, take care of their blood pressure, make sure that it's not dropping. They don't need to be working out at that point in juncture time. Working out to actually start drawing water back into the muscles. And you have some called bar receptors, some called the bar receptor reflex. If your blood pressure drops more than 20 points, or your heart rate increases more than 20 points, usually a lot of times when you stand up real quick and you do that, the bar receptor reflex catches you, you don't pass out. If it does one of those two, you stand up, you're going down for the count. The reason is it's the body's natural mechanism, because when you lay down, blood pressure is going to increase again. Because the sodium's so low, blood pressure is so low, we have to keep blood pressure as high as possible. So once the salt is down, we lay a fighter down all day. We keep them in a nice, cool place because we don't want those negative feedback signals, and we elevate the legs. This actually keeps the blood pressure going a lot easier. A lot of people don't realize, and honestly, I didn't realize this either when I started this game. I figured when you stand up, blood pressure would go up. It doesn't, because when you stand up, the blood pressure has got to push its way up into your body. When you lay down, it doesn't have that problem. So we keep the fighter as relaxed as possible. A lot of people would think, and it's a pretty easy concept to think, like, we got to keep them active, we got to keep them hot, and it doesn't realize that the body's defending itself. We have more than enough water to lose. If you're a muscular guy, you could be 70% water. And if you do the calculations, it's not that you don't have the water to lose, it's just your body doesn't want to lose it. Once you get to the point it's time to cut, we find out the exact temperature of the water, how fast you're sweating. Basically we put people, like, let's say we do a bath, we'll put them in 100, and we start the bath at 106 degrees, because what will happen is when somebody gets into the bath, the actual body temperature will lower to 104 degrees. 104 degrees is basic jacuzzi level water. So they get in there, and then you start a timer. It takes 1 to 5 minutes to start sweating. We call it cracking. Once they crack, that lets me know, okay, they crack super simple. I don't need to go super hot, because we're looking for a stimulus. The stimulus has already been created. So 1 to 5 minutes, we'll turn the temperature up to on the water to about 106 degrees, and just leave it there. Obviously, we have a thermometer. You're sitting there monitoring the heat. Once the 5 minutes is done, you start a 15-minute counter at 106 degrees. Now, let's say it takes 6 to 10 minutes. We'll go up to 107, 108 degrees temperature. Now, once you go above 10 minutes for someone cracking, this tells you it's going to be a nasty cut. But what we have to do is we have to do something extreme very quickly. We'll go up. The highest I've ever went was 112 degrees with Sam Alvey. If you go up to 113, you actually start cooking somebody. They'll start getting burns on their body. 111 is we've hit that a couple of times. But that's pretty hot water. And the problem is, a lot of coaches will stick their hand in the water. They'll be, that's not too bad. I was like, that's like sticking your hand in like a pool. You're like, oh, it's not that cold. And then you jump in the pool. Completely different experience. But then from those temperatures and the time it takes to crack, that gives us an indicator of how much water, how well your body's releasing it. And then a big misconception is that once you start sweating, they keep them in the heated area. You know what I mean? I would say it's like to a nutritionist, because people that do nutrition are trying to do weight cuts and they don't know nothing about this bath stuff. But I always say, like, if your client is on a diet and they're losing weight, what do you change on the diet? And they'll be like, well, you might want to do this. I was like, no, you don't change anything. They're losing weight.
Exactly.
You keep them doing whatever they're doing. Once the stimulus has been created, we pull them out of the bath and then we wrap them up. We don't need to keep heating the body. We're going to let the body try and cool itself off on its own. I'll typically put them in a sleeping bag, wrap them up in towels. And a lot of times they try and do this like interval training. They'll do, okay, we'll do 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out. If you're still sweating in the bag, why in the hell would I pull you out of the bag? So they stay as long as their body's still sweating. What we'll do is we'll typically wipe their head off and time how long it takes to beat up again. Once it takes more than 5 minutes to beat up on the head, that means that their body's cooled itself off. And it prepares them for the bath again. But this also gives me a strong indication of how much weight they lose. So, for example, if somebody went 1 to 5 minutes to crack, and then they stayed in the blanket or in the sleeping bag for 45 minutes and they're still sweating, typically they've lost 6 to 8 pounds. And what's crazy is it's the same for just about everybody. Heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, featherweight. It's the craziest thing. You would think scientifically, bigger guy drop more weight. No. The bigger guy can do more baths. Usually he typically cracks quicker. Most of the guys under 155 don't do well in baths. We do sauna work with them. Little guys don't like sitting still, man. Big guys, like when I was cutting weight, I'm like, I want to do the least amount of shit necessary. Throw them in the bath. I just go lay here. You know what I mean? Like least amount of work. But yeah, like nuts and bolts, that's kind of gut process. So it goes salt, carbohydrates, water. Once we cut the water, we never cut the water completely, but I always tell people, look at the body like a dry sponge. When a sponge is completely wet in the kitchen, you squeeze a little bit, water comes out. It's very, very easy. When you have a dry sponge and you put that sucker under the faucet, you get water and then you squeeze it, it ain't coming back out. So whatever they're drinking or consuming during that period of time. One thing I brought up was vasopressin. When they consume like ice chips, it actually keeps vasopressin down so they continue to keep peeing. When they're done with like a hot bath, or let's say a sauna work, or even in bodybuilding, let's say they do a workout, they go and they take an ice cold shower, 5 minutes in the front, 5 minutes in the back. What happens is during that period of time, their vasopressin spikes. Once they get out, it drops drastically, and that drop causes them to actually pee. So when you're cutting weight, man, a lot of people be like, oh, it's only 3 or 4 ounces. Dude, 3 or 4 ounces is it's a lot. So
Yeah.
a lot of tricks in the trade, a lot of things that we do. Timing has got to be perfect on anything, especially with like a 30-pound cut. But yeah, and then, as soon as they're done with that skill, then you start loading them back up again.
So I've got a few questions about this. I mean, you've got it down to an incredible science. Why the hot bath as opposed to the sauna primarily?
Yeah, so the best way to put it is like if you stuck your hand in an oven, right, at 180 degrees, or you stuck your hand in 180 degree water, the 180 degree water is going to burn your hand. It's going to be a lot quicker. One of them is kind of like sauna is kind of like cooking. The other one is searing, right? I have a lot more control of a lot more variables with the bath of what I'm doing with your body, how hot your body's getting versus the sauna.
Right.
Now, if I need to get you, and I hate to, it's so barbaric, but it's just a good analogy. But searing, you put that sucker on the pan, it cooks it very quickly. And like I told you, once your brain realizes that you have a very short period of time, your body's like, wait a minute, water's not coming in. I need to get as much water out as quickly as possible before that happens. And everything starts shutting down and my body starts reacting.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And Okay, so you said you're pulling salt. You said 3 days out. Is that correct? Reducing sodium. When are you pulling the carbs out? How far out do you reduce the carbohydrates?
Typically, I'll give them carbohydrates up until the day of weigh-ins. So, I'll start feeding them like frozen fruits, frozen berries, stuff like that. Like I told you about the and a frozen pineapple. Uh, if I give you an ice cube of water, your body will hold on to that, right? But if I give you fruit, your body will hold on to the water aspect of it. My body can actually burn off the carbohydrate aspect. So I'm hydrating the body, keeping the vasopressin down, and still giving them the energy needed to actually finish the cut itself. So frozen fruits the day prior, the day of, I'm giving them ice cubes a lot of times in that bath just to keep their sanity, man. It sucks. So a little bit of ice kind of keeps the palate wet, gets them. If they keep in there 2-3 minutes longer, that's the difference between making weight and not.
Got it. What are some of the things that you see people doing terribly wrong with water cuts? I mean, you look around at like high school wrestling. I mean, you see kids just trying to do these crazy water cuts on their own. They've got the trash bag on, and they're in the sauna, and they're on the bike. And I mean, I've never heard of a water cut getting into this level of a science as you have it. And it's a dangerous process. So, what are some of the dangers of water cutting? Because this could be legitimately life threatening.
Yeah, it's so understandable, man. Bro, if we had time, the crazy things I've seen, man. Oh God. Dude, okay, I gotta tell you a couple stories, and I'll go and tell you some like more generalized things. So in wrestling, they have a common myth that if you stand on your head for a minute and then you flip back around, what happens is you'll be at least a pound lighter. And the reason being in their thought process is that all the blood goes to your head, right? So when you step on the scale, the blood is falling. So it makes you lighter. Right. So now I want you, so like, I'm sure you've seen guys cut weight before, right? They're already lightheaded. So you got this guy who has no sodium in the body. They haven't drinking any water. And now they think it's a good idea to stand on their head and then flip back around. Like everybody passes out. I'm like, what do you like? I don't know. I think times I don't want to talk down to people because I understand it's like, even when I was cutting weight, I understood the science. But like you said, like when you carve a bodybuilder up and you're like, listen, you're going to be heavy tomorrow. Even if I knew that, it's nice to have somebody there to verify it. You know what I mean? Like, fuck, because you just want to see the scale go down. But
Right.
it's like you'll take like a syrup and you put it on a scale. Okay, this is how much syrup weighs this way. Now watch, the syrup is falling down and it still weighs the same amount, even though it's falling down, bro. Like, I don't think they understand the sciences. But
George, I don't understand what you're saying. You didn't have Conor McGregor on his head before his weigh-in.
look, okay, I'm gonna try to get in trouble for this, but it's hilarious. So Yoel, I told you, he's the biggest gun. He lost over 30 pounds in 2 days, and he wanted to make sure they went. So on the way to the scale, we go to the bathroom, his whole team. And I had one of my business partners with him. And this guy named Robbie Remy, he's a big, big dude. We look at each other like, what's going on? Well, Yoel gets completely naked. So imagine this just behemoth, just stark naked, right? And his coach is about 10 feet away from him. Yoel's we're looking at each other, and he's doing like a running start. So he does a running start at his coach, puts his hands on the ground and does a flip and puts his legs over his coach's head, right? Now, I wanted to give you an image here. He doesn't have any clothes on, dude. So I'm just like, oh, hell no. What is going on? And I just look at Robbie. Robbie looks at me. As soon as Yoel went back up, we went and caught him. Make sure, he hit the deck, But it's nuts. But, that's, a profession is extremely important to know exactly what to do, what not to do. To answer your question, and I did the same thing. When you're fighting, you want that scale to move down. So a lot of these guys, they know things that'll move the scale. So they'll pull their sodium. they'll pull the sodium like 3 weeks out. And they'll be like, oh man, my weight's down. I'm only 15 pounds off, and then they're like, okay, then they pull their carbs, 2 weeks out. Then they get there and they're like, oh man, I only got like 7 pounds. And I'm like, it's called a cut because you cut things. And I'm like, you literally have left nothing to cut,
Right.
And in extreme cases, some guys, they're so worried they'll start pulling the water. By the time they get to me, you have to do some drastic things. It's nuts. Like, I told you about osmosis, where you drink water, get rid of salt, drink water, get rid of salt. Think about the opposite effect. If you're in a desperate situation, what's the other way to go? You consume a fuck ton of salt. And what that does is that fucking cleans out the entire intestinal tract. I don't know. Have you ever taken sodium bicarbonate before? Like an excessive amount?
I have not taken an excessive amount personally. I've seen people who have, and I know exactly what happens.
Yeah, it's just osmotic diarrhea. It's pulling all that salt out. But you don't want to be doing that with these guys. So, that's a big thing is, watching the scale, not trusting the process. The problem is a lot of them don't actually have a process. They don't have somebody that knows what they're doing, somebody that doesn't validate, like, hey, it's okay, your weight went up because of this. Especially women. Women, when I started working with women, that's a whole nother ballgame because the 3 phases to their cycle, you have to know what to do differently for each one of those phases, especially when it comes to the cut. So, yeah, man, it's been an exciting career. I haven't had to deal with that in a long period of time. I did a favor for one of my old trainers, Master Lloyd Irvin, a phenomenal guy. Sadiq Yusuf we did a 27 or 30-pound cut, and he fights at 145 a few months ago in Vegas. But since working with Tyson, obviously Tyson doesn't have to cut. Joe doesn't have to cut. When I worked with Tommy, dude, like 10 pounds. And, you don't ever want to talk bad with the boxers, they're like, dude, am I going to make it? And I'm like, they're 5 pounds over. I'm like, bro, you burp, hiccup, and, fart twice, you're going to be on weight. You're fine, so.
Yeah. When you're staring down the barrel of a 30-pound weight cut, I mean, are you going into that a little bit nervous? I mean, have you had any close calls, any health scares with some of these guys going through those extreme cuts?
Yeah, it is, it's extremely scary, and there's a lot of thoughts that, how you put it, you're taking a bullet for people. For example, I've had dads, be like, hey, my son's got to cut, 30 pounds or 20 pounds, and they're like 13 years old. So in my head, though, I'm like, number one, that's insane. I can sit here and yell at the dad, tell him like, what kind of idiot he is. But I also know that kind of idiot is also going to try and do it on his own.
Do it
and work to do it
anyway. Yeah,
exactly. So I'll do it with these guys, and and I'm sitting there. There's watching a guy pass out, so common, man. And it's like a guy passes out, he comes to, and then being like, all right, you ready to rock and roll? You got to get back in there. It's very scary. Now they're life threatening, and then there's okay. Why did he pass out? Okay, it was low blood pressure. He shouldn't have stood up. And we got to make sure. So, like, my guys will prevent that as much. They'll be like, I feel fine. And I'll have them crawling all over everywhere. I'm like, you're not standing up. You're crawling everywhere you go. But yeah, man, like we're seeing these guys are the most vulnerable state. You're seeing the toughest guys in the world. And you're seeing them just vulnerable, passing out, just kind of looking to that. And I'm telling you what, man, they're looking to you like, we're going to make this, we're going to do this, you know what I'm saying? Like, and you have to be that voice of reason. Like, you got this, brother. 2 more minutes here. We're going to do 2 stints. My latest one was Ben Rothwell. He was fighting for the BKFC world title, and he had to lose 33 pounds that week. And, I did that over the phone. And, I'm kind of an asshole when I talk to people, because they were messing up little things and stuff like that at first. And I got the whole team. I was like, I want the whole team there. And I was like, if I say 12 almonds, you fucking give them 12 almonds. You give them exactly what, because people don't understand how scary this is, how dangerous this is. If you do it right, you can do it. And unfortunately, people are always trying to get the advantage, and they're gonna, try and bump everything up. And I've heard so many different things, like doing 2 weigh-ins. If you did a weigh-in the day of the fight, the only thing that'll happen is people would cut twice, and then try and rehydrate the weigh-in. So, if anybody watching, I think the best thing is find somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. Don't do it on your own. And yeah, man, just be careful.
Yeah, in the bodybuilding world, it's peaking a bodybuilder for the stage is interesting because you have to simultaneously get them super dry, but they also need to be super full, right? And one of the things that is really dangerous in the bodybuilding community is the abuse of diuretics. Whether the Lasix and the Diazide and all these things. And you and I talked a little bit off the air here. I was asking if diuretics are legal in combat sports, and I know they're not. Despite that, do guys still try to use them under the radar for some of these weight cuts? Would these make the process easier? Would it make it just way riskier?
Yeah. So luckily enough, man, I've worked with so many people, and I've seen the dark side, but I haven't seen anybody with diuretics, like nothing like Lasix or anything like that. And I've never even mentioned it to put it in their head, because, like I said before, bodybuilding is dangerous enough what they're putting their bodies through, but the one silver lining is that they're not getting punched in the head the next day. These days, if you're, I always tell people 3% dehydration equates up to 30% decrease in performance. If you're going in there at 70% with a guy that's trying to take your head off, it's pretty dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. So, having somebody taking diuretics, and bro, the stuff that I've seen people do, even, PEDs, people have not, like people that get popped for PEDs, they're not even doing them right. You know what I'm saying? It's like they weren't even helping them. Like, I'm like, they're like, oh, this is a PED. I'm going to take it and I'm going to become Superman. Like, no, I tell people, if you can't monitor your nutrition, you should never even look into PEDs. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like you can't balance a carbohydrate and a protein. How the hell are you going to balance estrogen and testosterone and everything else that you have to monitor? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, it's just, but yeah, luckily to answer your question, no, I haven't had any run-ins with that.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you see some of these deaths in the bodybuilding community, often you can trace it back to an abuse of diuretics right around the competition. You get these guys that are on stage at 4% body weight, barely enough body fat on them to survive. Then they're throwing diuretics into the equation and just dehydrating themselves, and potassium sparing diuretics, and they die of just an overconcentration of potassium in their blood, and their heart stops. But anyway, the last thing I want to touch on, and then I'll let you go, I know you're busy, the rehydration process. So I know, that's equally, if not more important than the cutting process itself. So, okay, guy makes weight. What does that rehydration process look like?
Okay, so you remember the formula that I gave you, the total glycogen? So, we got the lean body mass, we got the muscle glycogen, and we have the liver glycogen. I take that, we'll just keep it simple. Let's say it's 500 grams of total glycogen. We have a smaller guy. So I know to replenish the glycogen that he has, I have to get 500 grams. You also have to take into account the amount of glycogen that he uses each day as well. So from the time he weighs in to the time he fights, how much glycogen is his body using in a resting state. So I'll add that. Let's say, we'll just keep it simple, 200 grams. So I have 700 grams of carbohydrates that I have to replenish on this individual over a specific amount of time. What I'll find out is, like, what time is he weighing in and what time is he fighting? So after weigh-ins, people, they automatically, they try and start eating. Your body has digestive enzymes in the back of your saliva glands. It'll have those digestive enzymes. If you're not hydrated enough, your body can't break it down. So typically, most guys don't eat for they shouldn't eat 2 to 3 hours after weighing in. So first we work on hydration. We make specific shakes that are determined on their actual weight loss. After I find out how much your body loses from carbohydrates and water attached to it, let's say you have 10 pounds that you have to lose with just sheer water weight and sodium. Every pound of sweat, unless uh, I forget the name. I lost, but they excrete excess amount of salt. A lot of times people, if they have excess amount of sodium stains on their shirt, we might have to up it. But typically, about every pound is 500 milligrams of sodium. So if I have 10 pounds that I cut of water weight, that means I have to rehydrate them with 5,000 milligrams of sodium. Now,
Right.
of that, we want to do half of that being potassium. We get potassium from the coconut water, and then we get sodium from just regular table salt. I don't want like Himalayan like sea salt or anything like that. I just want typical sodium chloride. I mixed those two together. They found out that a small amount of carbohydrates will actually increase the rehydration effect. So the amount of carbohydrates that are in coconut water, just plain coconut water, will give you that. So I think 1 cup of coconut water has 660 milligrams of potassium, and then 1 teaspoon of table salt has 2,300 milligrams of sodium chloride. The thing is, we have to make those in 3 shakes. If the World Health Organization, they created specific shakes that we first started looking at with people with specific disease like malaria and things like that. The problem is that they're losing water so quickly that even compared to a weight cut, that a weight cut doesn't even come close to that. And what happens is if you give somebody over 1,600 milligrams at one specific time, they'll get osmotic diarrhea. So we'll give them shakes. Now, the shakes themselves have to be at specific temperatures. Cold will they'll dump into your small intestinal tract faster. But if somebody has tendencies of cramping, they're going to cramp a lot more. So you got to give them room temperature. It typically takes 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll do it in liter bottles. People don't realize that, let's say I have 1,600 milligrams of sodium chloride, and I give it to them in 8 ounces versus a 1 liter. The osmolality changes, and again, that'll cause the osmotic diarrhea again. So the amount of water is extremely important. The potassium is extremely important. Another thing is caffeine. Caffeine increases glycogen replenishment by like 400%. I believe, this is going to sound crazy, 8 milligrams per kilogram of body weight for an individual over the course of 3 shakes. It's a lot of caffeine, but in between a regular room temperature. But we'll set times for the amount of time it takes to drink each shake, depending on how hard the weight cut was. Once the hydration is it's not completed, but it's started, that's giving me the ability to, we start digesting food. We start introducing things very lightly. Carbohydrates, let's say somebody weighs in at 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday, then we know, 1 o'clock is going to be their first meal. We got to take into account not only their first meal, but we got to take into account what time are they going to bed. So they go to bed at 10 o'clock, then they wake up at 8 o'clock the next morning, or say 10 o'clock and wake up at 6 o'clock. That's 8 hours of time that they obviously can't be eating. So you take that away, and then before the fight, you're not going to feed somebody directly before a fight. So we find out what time that they're fighting, and then we usually cut back depending on how well they digest and what their snack's going to be. We'll say 2 hours before the fight. Then that window gives us, how many meals are they going to? Typically, it's going to be about 5 to 6 meals. And if they have 700 grams of carbs, it's going to be very rice. So they have like soy sauce, so they get sodium, but the next meal will be potatoes. So we do rice, potatoes, keep everything white. We don't want any complex carbohydrate stuff that's broken down very, very easily in the body. You want to replenish them very quickly. We stay away from veggies. We stay away from fats unless they're a woman. Women, they've actually found out with like marathon runners. Marathon runners did the same thing a lot towards MMA fighters. They would deplete carbohydrates to carbo load, so the body would create more storage space. But they found out that without giving them fat, their bodies didn't replenish as proficiently. So giving women like avocado, olive oil, things like that in their meals is extremely beneficial. For men, you want to keep it as the fat low as possible. The meat, I tell them meat's more of a filler. It does help out with the balancing of liquids in the body, but usually depends on the size of the individual. Might anywhere from 6 to 10 ounces. Lean chicken breast, fish, like tuna, stuff like that. The next day, we start incorporating the same types of foods that they eat every single day. The portion sizes might change depending on how many carbs that they need, but I think I've seen a big problem with people trying things for the first time. Mm-hmm. For some reason on fight day. They're like, wow, dude, I'm going to take this pre-workout supplement for my fight. They're like, dude, if you didn't do it, right? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then that's in the most basic nutshell how we do the dehydration process as well.
Yeah, well, we need to charge every member of my audience a seminar fee right now. I mean, I know you do a lot of this as part of your living. No, I mean, this is incredible information. One question, are you able to use IVs with the guys in the rehydration process? Okay.
We're not. They banned IVs years ago. Doesn't mean it still doesn't take place, but the one thing I do want to tell people is that, like you talk about PEDs, IVs are considered PEDs now in MMA and in boxing. The thing is when you take one bag of saline, that's 9,000 milligrams of sodium chloride. A lot of these guys take 2 bags. Like you were talking about balancing potassium sodium ratios. Mm-hmm. That means you just took 18,000 milligrams of sodium chloride straight to the body. Yeah. A lot of guys, they don't know how to do that. I would say IV is kind of like a protein bar. You can't really jack that up. You just open it, eat it. To do proper oral rehydration, it takes a little bit more science, but it is a lot more effective and you control a lot more variables.
Absolutely. Well, George, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I mean, this has been awesome information for both myself and the audience. I've been a fan of yours for years now. So, man, I was really fired up to get you here on the show. So what's coming up for you, man? Just training with Joseph and getting ready for hopefully a fight here in the next few months, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah. We're working with Patty Donovan. He'll be looking for IBF world #1 contender spot 2. He's fighting June 7th. So a lot of stuff in the boxing world. We just keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully you see us fight for Undisputed in September.
Yes, sir. Well, George, where can people find you at?
Honestly, I don't have anything right now. You can find me on Instagram at Lockloaded MMA. Anybody that has any questions, you can always DM me. I'm an open book. Anybody cutting weight loss, whatever. That's the best place to get me.
Understood. And guys, you can find me on Instagram as well. John Heck on Instagram. You can go to my website, HammerChiselPerformance.com, for my coaching services, training programs, ebooks, all that good stuff. And guys, use code HECK at checkout for all troponin supplements. Anyway, George, I appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother. It's been a blast.
Yes, sir. We'll catch you guys next time.